Good afternoon, guys. Good afternoon. Hope we are all doing well. All right, instructor has joined. Good afternoon, sir. Hope you are well. We're just waiting for everybody else to join, and then we can start.
Greetings, Frank and Tim.
Oh, how are you, sir?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. How is everyone?
This seems to be everyone for now. I don't know what happened, but I think we might as well just continue with the numbers we have to avoid like moving too much.
Okay. Do you think maybe they'll join like later?
Let's give it maybe 5 minutes. So right now it's 10 past. So let's give it like 5 minutes, and then whoever joins, and then after 5 minutes, at quarter past, we start. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that works. That
Right.
works.
Today we got Mr. Jack. Got Mr. Jack here. It's going to take us through the whole lesson. So, Mr. Jack, I think we can start because I don't think there's anyone else who's joining.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Frank.
All right.
Greetings, everyone. Everyone who has joined. Thank you very much for joining the session as we continue on our course, which is the course that takes you from the Google Coursera that you're doing currently, to prepare you for the more advanced stuff. Before you then go and specialize into something in like a category. So today, I don't know if everyone received the curriculum and some documents that I shared with you, but today we'll be focusing on networking concepts, networking security, and cybersecurity, as in what do we mean by network security? If you are in the network security, if you're working as a network security engineer in the cybersecurity, what will you be doing, and what will you be looking at, and what are your what are the objectives or the expectations that the company will have on you, and what are the deliverables that you should be delivering? So that's the end product, but there's some concepts you have to know. You have to have some understanding of what a network is, what components make up a network, and what do we mean if we saying we are defending a network or we're securing a network, and what do we mean if we say a network is not secure enough and susceptible to breaches. Okay, so everything that you are going to then learn, even after this, or whichever category you're going to specialize in, you find that there is always a need for you to have networking understanding, to understand a network, because that's usually where resources are deployed. Okay, so yeah, from I remember from last time we discussed about the Azure free trial. I don't know if there was anyone who was able to go ahead and actually activate a free trial. If there's anyone, they can just maybe send a message in the chat. Just wanted to find out if we okay. I see Ashanafi. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. Okay. Do we have any other people that managed to get a free trial from Azure? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. No problem at all. So today we'll be focusing on networking concepts, that is going through what a network is. I understand that you've already gone through some course, some tutorials in terms of networking, and you already have an appreciation of what a network is. Before we dive deep, I hope everyone can see my screen. This is just a PowerPoint presentation that just kind of guiding us through the whole course. As you can see from the first page, it talks about a network being the practice of connecting computers and other devices to share resources and communicate. To share resources and communicate. That's the most important part. So we're talking about just your phone right now, your computer right now that you're using is actually connected to a network, which then allows you to communicate, which is what we are doing right now through Teams. So what allows that to happen is what we call a network. So in cybersecurity, your goal as someone in network security is to make sure that the network is secure. So the resources that we are talking about and the communication that's going to go through chat or documents, everything that can be shared through an organization, your goal is to make sure that that is secure. Secure meaning they are not susceptible to being accessed by the wrong people. So that brings you to then understand the network and to understand if a breach is going to happen, how would it happen? So you are going to have this knowledge if you sort of like have understanding of what the network is. So like I said, I understand that everyone has gone through, I think, the basic tutorials of what a network is. And there are some types of networks. We have what we call LAN network. We have what we call the WAN network. We have the public and the private networks, and we have the VLANs. That those are part of network segmentation. So just to recap, a local area network is a small network that just connects a number of devices that can amount to like maybe 100 or maybe 20 or even more. But the identifier there is that they are on the same network, which means they are sharing an IP address subnet. Okay, so a WAN, on the other hand, is spread across a large area, and you have a WAN being the communication of these LAN networks. So the LAN networks that we talked about, in the WAN network, they become like endpoints, sort of like your network right now, the computer that is connected to a network in your home, and that is your local area network, because you have one router or whatever it is that you have, but you have sort of like a subnet that gives you an IP address, and that can allow you to communicate with all the devices that are connected to your network. Now, when you jump over to you actually communicating through this Teams call, and now you are using what is called a wide area network, because you can now connect to my LAN network from your LAN network, and we are able to connect and share information. So that is the difference between a LAN and a WAN network. Then we have public networks and we have private networks. This is important in cybersecurity because you have to know these types of networks and what they mean. So public networks is like, let's say you go to a hotel or you go, to maybe a library or something like that, which is like they give you the Wi-Fi, which is accessible to anyone. We just go to that place. So it's a public network, and public networks in most cases where breaches happen because no one is controlling the network, or no one is sort of like monitoring the network, or no one is, you don't have the control of your network once you connect to it. So in most cases, people get hacked when, they connect to a public network, or maybe they go to, they're traveling, they go to the airport and they go there, you connect your phone, and all of a sudden you are hacked. So a private network, on the other hand, is a network that you have control of. Like, for example, your network right now, if you are at home or you are at the office, that network is not accessible to anyone, but it's accessible to a few people, or a group of people. So that is the network that also has to do with company networks, or where you could be employed. You could also be employed even in public networks, but the difference is really huge, that a private network is not accessible to anyone, which is outside the world. Now, your job as a network security engineer is to make sure that that happens, which is that there's no access from the outside world into your network. So that's kind of like a gatekeeper. So those are the type of networks we have, and you have to understand them because you'll be dealing with them every day. And on that topic, we have what is known as VLANs and segmentation. So VLAN and segmentation is where you sort of partition your network into different subnets that cannot communicate together. So you have your phone connected to one LAN network you might name corporate network. That's where your devices are. You have your computer, then you might have your IoT network, which is also connecting your television or your cameras or those intelligent devices that assist us every day. And then you can also have another network that your guests, when they come to you, visit you, can connect to, which is also different from the corporate network. Now, why is this important? This is important because, again, if we are connecting to the same network and you give it access to things that are more susceptible of being hacked, like your cameras or IoT devices, then if somebody breaks into the network where the IoT devices is, they can not be able to then breach into the next network, which is where your phone is. So they may have access to the network that has your IoT devices, but that doesn't mean that all your network is breached because you've segmented. That's why it is very important that I think even auditors, when they're auditing your networks and stuff, that's one of the things they look at. Like, do you have your network devices grouped into categories that make sense? For example, are you connecting your computers to the same network that your guests are connecting? If that is happening, then that is not a best practice. So that's why it is important to understand VLANs and segmentation. So VLANs, just a virtual LAN, which means you could have one LAN network, physical network, and you can then virtualize that physical network to have other multiple networks on top of it. That's what a VLAN is. We're talking about LAN networks. So what I mean is, if I don't know if you've maybe worked with the routers before or firewalls before, but you do know that they have ports where you plug in an Ethernet cable, right? If it's a router, you can plug in an Ethernet cable that goes to your access point that gives you Wi-Fi, or maybe they're in the same place, but there are some ports at the back of that device. And those ports, let's say if you had one port, when you plug in an Ethernet cable into one port, you're gonna get one network, right? That's if you're gonna plug it into your computer, or if you're gonna plug it into a switch, you're gonna get one network. But if you do VLANs, that port could give you 4 different networks, and it's still one port. That's what VLANs are. So from there, we can move on to what are known as network protocols and the OSI model, which is, again, something that is very important. I think this, I don't know your background, but I know from my background that we've been learning this since I started maybe going into college or even in high school. So it is a very important thing to know in networking and in cybersecurity as well, because the OSI model is the standard that is used across the world to do communication, right? So what we mean is that if people in America or in the USA and people, let's say in Nigeria, use different protocols for communication for their networks, then it means that there's going to be a challenge for people in Nigeria to be connecting with people in USA, because they are not using the same standard of protocols to communicate. So the organization set up this OSI and TCP/IP model to standardize the communication protocols that get used across the world now, meaning that we can communicate with anyone everywhere because the protocols are still the same. And this is what the OSI model is all about. Okay, so it does have 7 layers, which is the physical layer, the data link layer, and the network layer, transport layer, session layer. I'm sure we've seen, we've went across this, and we know that at the physical layer, it has to deal with Ethernet cables or anything that is physical in the network. For example, you can have your fiber cables, all of that. That's your physical layer, everything that is physical. Now, when you go to data link layer, you're going to the next layer. And from there, you jump into network layer, which also has to do with the network and things to do with the routing and stuff like that. And then you go into transport layer, which is then going to the session layer, presentation, and application layer, which is basically the top layers. So as a cybersecurity, you're going to identify which one you are going to focus on. Some people want to do application layer, that security, which is then we're talking about web applications. We're talking about the delivery once the information has actually been delivered. to the user also that kind of like get bunched the same way with presentation, which is just like how the information gets presented to people. HTTPS, HTTP being some of the protocols that do that. So yeah, you have to understand the OSI layer, OSI model, and what it means and which layer you'll be going to focus on. Now, you don't have to cram this or to have it in the back of your mind every time, but you have at least to have an appreciation of knowing that, okay, now I'm dealing at the layer 2 of the network. I'm dealing with switches, right? Now I'm dealing with the network layer. I'm dealing with the routers, right? Now it's transport. We're dealing with communication protocols. So you have to also just go and dive deep into the network OSI. I'm sure we've seen it a lot of times, and that's the reason why it does exist. So we can now jump to IP addressing and subnetting. This is also an interesting, area. But again, you're not expected to know exactly how the, IPs gets calculated, but you're supposed to have an appreciation of what an IP is and how do they get used, and what is an IP address, and what is subnetting. Why do we have 192.168.1.1? Why do we have 22? All the classes of subnetting of IP addresses. We have the class A, we have the class C, we have the class B networks. So you have to know also, IP addressing and subnetting, because there are sometimes when you're in network security, you're going to deal with a lot of, IP addresses, because when you're setting up a network, is basically, IP addresses are basically used for each device, as we know that an IP address gets allocated to a device to communicate, for there to be a communication, right? So your device is an IP address that it does have. And for it to communicate with another device, it does have to know the IP address of that other device. That brings us into routing, which is you need a router, right? So let me just explain a basic simple network, right? So your basic simple network, remember we talked of the WAN and the LAN network. Now the WAN network is already existing. You're trying to set up a simple basic network. Now, for it to communicate over the internet, it does have to have some connection with the WAN network, right? So what happens is that you need a device that can do that. So that's how you get a router. So a router, or basically what it basically does is that it does routing, which is it allocates IP addresses to devices, and then it establishes the path. Like if you want to go somewhere, if you want to access a website, the router is what then takes you to that website server, or the next hop, which is the path that leads you to where the web server is hosted, so that you can access information. For example, if you open your browser and then you type in a website domain, or like facebook.com on your browser, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a session that's going to be started, and a packet is going to be sent to your router. Now your router is going to look at what what you're trying to access, and then it's going to find the quickest route that you can use to access facebook.com. So the router is just going to show you the next router or the path that you need to go through. So once the packet goes through until it gets to the Facebook server, and the Facebook server then replies with the information that you are inquiring. Maybe it's the home page. And again, it communicates through that router. So that's that's what a basic network is. So it's just a connection of your devices, your computer, your printer, your phone, and you have one subnet that you have 192.168.1.0/24, which has a 254 IP addresses. So again, this is not a course about IP addressing and subnetting, but it's just to explain to you that you have to have an understanding, appreciation of what an IP address is, which I believe that all of us do at this point. And then you also have to know these protocols, which is network address translation, How does it work? Network address and translation is very important for you to know, because even as a network security person, you're going to be working with it a lot. So for me to just, let me just sort of like explain what NAT is. So remember, when we started with the internet back in the day, we didn't have a lot of computers and a lot of like what it is today. So let's say the way they were communicating is that they would put an IP address on each device. So let's say your computer, it needs a public IP address. Now, public IP addresses are what takes you to the internet. I'm sure everyone knows that. So they will put a public IP address on each endpoint. So your computer has to have a public IP address. Your phone has to have a public IP address, and because the IPv4, as you know, the 32-bit addressing mode does not have a lot of IPs that can go into billions. As we continue to have more and more devices, that setup was not sustainable of giving each device a public IP address. So what they did instead, they invented this network address translation, which means that now they can use private IPs, which is 192.168. I'm sure if all of us know what a private IP is, and what are the the ranges that goes for private IP addresses. So what they did is that they now use the private IP address for your devices. So, and then all your devices share one public IP address. So you could have tens and tens or hundreds and hundreds of devices that are on your local area network, and all of them are sharing one public IP address. And this happens through what is known as network address translation, which is that your private IP address gets to the public IP address every time you try to inquire for something. So that is NAT. So when you're setting up your router or your firewall, you'll find that you're going to do a lot of NATing, because your LAN already is using private IP address, and you have an interface that is one public IP address that's going to be shared. So you're going to have a policy that NATs traffic from the LAN private IP address to the public IP address for it to go to the internet. So that is nothing. Again, you have to know all these concepts if you are going to work into network security, because you're going to be using them every day. All right, so that was the basic concepts of networking. I don't know if we have anyone who has questions or would want to add something. Anyone who might have questions? Okay, so I know that the going through this basic stuff and theory stuff is not interesting. So, but it's some fundamental knowledge you should have to understand what a network is and what you'll be responsible for. And if you're working in network security, what would you be dealing with? So the basic stuff for networking, I'm sure you've already seen it, is very necessary for you to have as you then get introduced to the more complicated or your daily job. So in network security, there is, as I said, your goal is to make sure that your devices have no one who can access them from the outside world. So what I mean is that your computer, which is on your LAN network, you don't want anyone from outside the world to be able to connect into it. Okay, so that means that you're going to close off all that those ports or whatever allows somebody to commit to link to go into your computer or whatever, it's a server or your web application. You're going to be closing all the holes. That is your main job. And on top of closing all the holes, you're also going to be monitoring how traffic is being handled, and if there is malware, because as the world technology advances, so does malware, so does hacking, or so does those threats increases. So you have to be daily monitoring and feeding yourself with a lot of knowledge about how to adapt to new threats and stuff like that. And one of the most basic thing that you should know that you'll be working with is what is known as a firewall, right? So we have a router, which we said does routing, gives you an IP address, and it takes you to the internet. But we have a firewall that looks at every packet that you are sending out and that is coming inside your network, and making sure that that packet is safe for you to go through. And if it's not safe, then we are going to block it. So that brings you to the network firewalls. So network firewalls are what you'll be working with in most cases. Every network that is secure does have a firewall. Again, every network that is secure, whether it's an on-premise network or it's in the cloud, it does have what we call a firewall. So like I said, a firewall is the gate. So before you even go out to the internet, the last thing you see is the firewall. So if everything is coming outside the internet and going inside your network, the first thing that it interacts with is the firewall. So that means that the firewall becomes a very important part of the security. And in most cases, it could be the last defense, meaning that if somebody goes through the firewall, then it becomes easier for them to access anything that is inside that network. Okay, so we have a lot of different types of firewalls in terms of models, in terms of, we have FortiGate firewalls, we have Cisco firewalls, we have Sophos firewalls, we have Palo Alto firewalls, we have a lot of firewalls. So one of the things that can get scary is that you can think that, how am I going to know all of these firewalls? Do I need to know all of them? No, you don't need to know all of them. All you need to know is the concepts that goes on when you're using a firewall, when you're protecting a network using a firewall, because these concepts get reapplied in each and every model type of firewall that is out there. They still use the same concepts. So in most cases, if you understand one firewall, it becomes very, very easier for you to interact with the next firewall. The only difference between those things is how the graphical user interface is presented. And probably maybe a little things of how they actually do their firewalling. But in most cases, the concepts are the same. So because of that, there's one one top firewall that gets used across many industries, which is called the FortiGate firewall. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of what is known as the FortiGate firewall. It comes from a company called Fortinet, and they specialize in network security and cybersecurity. So they have this product called a FortiGate firewall. It comes in many models. Let me see if I can pull up page here. I don't know if everyone can see. Yes, there's also Checkpoint firewall. It also falls into that category. And Checkpoint is also one big company that specializes in great firewalls. I've worked with them as well. So this is how a FortiGate firewall looks like. So like I said, there are different models. We have 400F, 90G, 91G. The good thing is that the operating system that goes into this thing, or the firmware that goes into this thing, is the same. So the way you do things for each of them is all the same. The reason why they have different models is because just like in computers, you have models that doesn't need to be placed in a big network. There are small models that is small CPU, small RAM. So they are suitable for small networks, and then the networks as they grow, they have modules for that, right? So that's why they have different models for this, and they also have other products like VPNs. But this is basically how it looks like. Right. So before we even jump into this, there's something I wanted to show you. Okay, I don't know if everyone can see my screen, which is the topology diagram that I have. So this is an environment that we want to develop for you guys that you can play with, and as we go through the course, you'll be able to interact with some of the things that we're talking about, so that they make much more sense instead of just being theoretical. But like, it's still work in progress. But what I just wanted to show you here is that, if you can see, this is a network that is in the cloud. Now, this network resembles any network that is even on premise. Obviously, we get complex, but this is one standard type of network that you can see in most cases. Right. So as you can see from it, we have the internet, and from the internet, we go into this, FortiGate VM, which is the FortiGate firewall, right? So the reason why we have a box on it is because this firewall does have two virtual networks. So virtual network A and virtual network B. So I put in these boxes as a representation of that network. So on that network, we have a subnet, right? So that subnet is called public subnet. Why? Because it does have a public IP address, which means it can go to the internet. So the public IP address that we are going to use for everything that is inside our network is only on the firewall. So that's how you position the firewall on your network. Everything comes after the firewall, because here is why we have our door, and here is where we are going to do a lot of defenses. Because anyone, when we represent internet like the cloud like this, we're just meaning the rest of the wide area network, right? So this is your public IP address, and this is your FortiGate firewall, and this is the subnet, which is the public subnet, and we have all these private subnets that are here. We have this subnet A3, which is hosting a Windows server. So this Windows server is on its subnet, and the Linux server is on its own subnet, which is network segmentation. If you remember what we were talking about, VLANs. So we have three different subnets that are hosting three different workloads, which is Windows server, Linux server, and the Splunk server. And now these are all subnets that are on the same VNet, so they can communicate. Right now, we have another network, which is VNetwork B. So this is not going to connect to be communicating by default to all these other subnets, because it's a different network. Okay, so but this one actually is a private network. So there's something you do if you want them to communicate, which is known as virtual networking peering. Now this is in the cloud. A virtual networking peering is like giving a tunnel between these two virtual networks, so the endpoints that are in these subnets get to communicate with the endpoints on this other subnet. So, okay, that's the whole topology of the diagram. But what we are wanting to focus on today is just the FortiGate file here, and another subnet which is containing a virtual Windows server, Active Directory server, which is what we're going to try and simulate. So yeah, that's how a network would look like. Now, what I mean is that anyone who is outside the internet is not going to be able to communicate with these devices that are in the private network. They are only going to be communicating with the public subnet that we have here with the public IP address. So there's something that people do. So let's say you do have your application hosted on this Linux server here, right? And you only open the port, that allows people to access the application, but you want to do administration and you're not in the office, or you are not in the cloud, if it makes sense, since this is a cloud network. What you do then is that you use a VPN to connect to your network in the cloud, or maybe the network in the office, right? And that VPN creates a tunnel which is secure for you. So, but a tunnel means it does have encryption. So if the tunnel is encrypted, then no one is going to be able to access it. So no one is going to be able to interfere with your traffic as you go to access your private resources with the VPN. So that's the use of a VPN. A VPN just creates a tunnel that allows you to connect to a private network, or it could be even a public network, but in most cases, a private network with the resources that are protected. So it opens a tunnel for you. So anyone cannot interfere with that traffic because it is encrypted. Okay. So that is what a FortiGate firewall is, and it's just one type of a FortiGate firewall. Now, as a cybersecurity person, you're going to be working with these a lot, because that's what, they get applied everywhere. They get applied in, web application firewalls. We have network firewalls. We have, even the firewalls that are on your endpoints, like they come, for Windows, they have the Windows firewall that comes as an inbuilt firewall. So those things are just there to make sure that they protect you, right? So these firewalls use a lot of tools to help defend anyone who is not authorized to access your network. So some of the machines they use, I hope everyone has seen this before, IDS, IPS, which is an intrusion detection and prevention system. So it's sort of like the brains that sort of like will be looking at all the traffic that is passing through, and it will be using some protocols to sort of like detect anything that looks out of the ordinary. So your intrusion or your IPS, you don't find this only in firewalls, by the way, but in FortiGate firewall, they've really set up this thing correctly, and it works amazing because every time you go to try and visit a site that is not secure or a site that could compromise you on the internet, the FortiGate is going to interface that, and it's going to block that traffic so you can't access it because it's malware. And the thing that makes that happen is what we call an intrusion detection or prevention system, which is an inbuilt system that's put into the FortiGate file and scans your network. And like I say, the VPNs, which are virtual private networks, sort of like if you are not in a cloud, like I said, if you're not on premise, you need to connect to that private thing. How do you do it? So you need a virtual private network solution, which sort of like creates a tunnel between you and your private network, and you'd be able to access those resources. So one of the things you can see is that if you have a private IP address that is in another network, you cannot be able to access that private IP address on another network. So what I mean is that if I'm here and I have my private IP addresses and you guys are over there, you won't be able to access my private IP addresses, but a VPN allows you to do that. So that's why we have VPNs. And these VPNs get set on the file. Okay. So yeah, so as I wanted to show you how a FortiGate file can be deployed in a cloud environment. So when I say cloud environment, you automatically know that it's not a physical device. It's a virtual machine. It's a virtual device. So in a cloud, when you're deploying the FortiGate file, you're going to deploy it as a VM, as a virtual machine. But like I said, the concepts still are the same as the one you get, even it's a physical device on premises. So firewalls, how do they do what they do, or what would you be doing as a network security engineer working with firewalls? So you'll be working with what are known as rules and policies. So rules and policies are what helps you to define things. For example, you could say I just want my people that are working on this application to just access that application. I don't want them to be accessing other things that can compromise them. So what you do, you create a rule that disallows or that blocks the rest of the other traffic and only allows the traffic that you want them to access. So that's what firewall rules and policies are. So if you are working with a virtual machine in the Azure or in AWS, the outcome that you're trying to get is securing that, make sure that the workloads that are in your in your Azure cloud or AWS cloud are safe from cyber threats. So you basically blocking everything that can compromise your resources and just allowing only the things that you need to access. So we are going to do some sort of like a demonstration of how this works in the Azure cloud. And you can see here, this is how you then configure the VPN that then allows you to connect to things remotely, as I was saying. Okay, so what is doing still here? Let me pull out the Azure Lab environment so I can show you. Okay, I hope everyone can see my screen that is showing the Azure portal. Okay. Okay, again, so I know we worked on a Linux thing last time when we were just deploying a virtual machine in the Azure cloud. But today I wanted us to sort of like look at the deployment of a firewall in a network or the whole development of a network, or how do you start, or how do you do it in Azure, how do you do it in a cloud environment. So one of the things that I already did was deploying the firewall itself, because it takes like a little bit of time to actually fully deploy. So I just thought I could do it beforehand, but the process is just similar to how you would, deploy a normal virtual machine like we did last time. So this is still also possible using your free trial. Okay, so this is the FortiGate VM that I deployed, just to kind of like run you through it. So you're still coming here, you're still doing Azure Virtual Machine, and then you're going to, select a resource group like we did last time. Like a resource group is what bunches your resources, and you're gonna give it a name. And once you give it a name, you're gonna give it a region which is close to you. So again, you have to use a region that is close to you so that you don't have a lot of latency accessing the resources. So in this case, I chose South Africa, and availability zones. This is for redundancy. So that is to say, if something happens to your VM where it's hosted currently, do you have a backup that can be that can quickly replace that one, so that you don't have downtime? So if something happens to your VM that is hosted in this data center, if you have another one in another zone, then you have redundancy, and then you have backup. So that's what availability zones are. Not to really worry about them. And then you're going to select your security type, and I always advise people to choose standard because it's cheaper, and you can always change that once you deploy. And then you select the image. So here is where you're going, and then you are going to look for an image for your FortiGate firewall. So again, it's not just the FortiGate firewall that you can do this with. There's a lot of other firewalls that you can do with. And as you can see, you have your FortiGate firewall. It actually goes for $0.36 for 3 years, which is the license. This is the license thing, because these firewalls, for them to work, they have to be licensed. So the license is what then allows the firewall to be continuously block malware as people, as technology get advanced, as there are new cyber threats that are emerging. The IPS engine continues to also upgrade its signatures, because it's a database of every information that is out there on the internet. So if anything is considered like a threat or malware, the IPS is supposed to be blocking that. So that's why we need the license. So you just come here, you select which one you want to go with, generation 1, generation 2, and you have your image. And after this, you're going to select the size that you want to go with. So if you want to use the size, which is for vCPU 16 gig, you can do that. But in our case, I used this B2S, which is 2 vCPUs and 4 gig memory. Right, and a firewall is very expensive. As you can see, that is like $681 per month. But you can also go lower if you want to use something that doesn't have a lot of CPUs and RAM. So from there, you're going to set up a password, and then you're going to give your FortiGate firewall a password, and then you're just going to go to disks, and most of the things here you can leave as default. If you want to change your OS type, disk type, because the premium is expensive, you can also do it here. You can choose the standard SSD or even the HDD, depending on your needs. So if you need something that is faster, if you have a lot of workloads and a lot of bandwidth passing through your network, then you need something that is also, that is higher specifications, that it can handle that traffic. So that's where you choose that. And the rest of the things you can leave as default, and then you go to networking, which is the interesting part. The networking part is where you define a virtual network that the FortiGate firewall is going to be sitting on. Okay. So Azure does create this for you automatically. So if you're doing it in your trial, you're going to see just a virtual network already created for you here, and they show you the subnet that's it going to be and the IP address subnet. How many IPs you're going to have is also going to be shown here. But if you want to create your own thing, you can say create new, and then you can create your virtual network, and you can allocate it IP addresses. And you don't have to use the IP addresses that comes here by default. You can also put your own subnets. If you have planned your network, you can still be able to put in your subnets in there, and then you don't use the default ones. But Azure knows how to really structure this perfectly. So in most cases, you just want to tweak probably maybe the subnet they give you. But in most cases, you can just leave it as it is. And this is how you create a virtual network. So your virtual network need to have an address space, which is the IP addresses, which are the IP addresses that can be assigned to your workloads. So as you can see, we have 10.3.0.0 to 10.3.25.25, which is a total of this many addresses. So you're not forced to do this. You can also make your subnets very smaller, which is recommended for security reasons. And it still allows you to do that again. So that's how you set up your virtual network and your subnets if you want to do that. The other thing that you have to know is that you need a public IP address. And again, Azure is going to create a new one for you by default. But if you want to change that, you can do create new, and you'll be able to create your own public IP address and make it static. So a public IP address that is static, it means it doesn't change. And if you are doing a firewall, you always want to do a static IP address, right? And then you can do your routing preference, but not to worry about all of these things. But this is how you create a public IP address. And you're going to have a network security group. I'm sure we talked about this last time. Network security group is where you set policies that allows traffic to go through. It's sort of like a firewall in itself, but Azure put in these to make sure that even if you don't have a firewall, you still can be able to block things and allow certain things. So that's what an NSG is. And from there, you're just going to leave the rest of the things as default. Nothing to change here. And then you're going to do tags, review, and create. And it's going to review your settings. And if your settings are correct, it's going to say validation passed. And then you go ahead and do a create. And on this left side, it's going to show you the estimated monthly cost of that file. So you can always make decisions on it. Okay, so that's how you deploy a FortiGate firewall in the Azure environment. Now, once you deploy your firewall, you want to access it. So there are a few things that I want you to pay attention to that are very important when you're dealing with firewalls in the cloud. So as I said, let me click on it so you can see. So this is the FortiGate firewall. So one of the things that is very important that you should know is the public IP address, because this is what's going to allow you to connect to it. Okay, so you have to take note of the public IP address, and you can find it in overview. Okay, now if you scroll all the way down, you find where it says networking, or you can just go there by going under networking and go to network settings. So if you click on networking, you're going to see the interface that is on the FortiGate firewall, right? So in physical devices, we're talking of ports, like the port that is on the FortiGate firewall. This is where you see it. And then you see which network is that port using. Okay, so a virtual network is telling me the Linux test VNet, which is a virtual network that we created earlier, and it's using the default subnet. And I can see the IP address, which is the private IP address of the FortiGate file. So check note, there's the public IP address, and then there's the private IP address, right? So in Azure, these get mapped to each other. The private IP address and the public IP address get meshed together. So you don't get to see it on the firewall. Now I'll show you this once we log into it. You don't get to see the public IP address on the file. this public IP address I was talking about, you don't get to see it on one of the interfaces, but it is there. But here they use the private IP address. That's what you see. So this makes it very secure because your public IP address is not exposed. Instead, what they do is they do a one-to-one matching, which is the private IP address gets matched to that public IP address. So you don't even see it inside the FortiGate file. So once you deployed it, there's nothing really that you need to do. But again, like I said, you need to understand that the network settings are here, and you need to understand the public IP address of the firewall, where to find it, and the private IP address, where to find it. So after this, I'll share some documentation where Microsoft actually sort of like gives you a step-by-step of how to do it in a tenant, right? So they sort of like show you all the steps and what you need to do. And this is the other section that I wanted to show you. There's the inbound port rules, and then there's the outbound port rules. Okay, so these are the rules that allows you to then access the FortiGate firewall, because these are settings that are on this interface. So if you want to allow a certain port, this is where you come and create that policy, whether it's an inbound port rule or an outbound port rule, right? This is on a network security group. So again, you get it under the network settings. So this is what I think is most important for you to get. You need to understand the public IP address, where to find it, and you need to understand where you get the networking settings and what it is there. This is the interface that is on the FortiGate firewall. Okay. Right. So if you remember when I showed you the topology, I said there is a public subnet and then there's a private subnet. So we have a public subnet, which is the subnet that does have this private IP address and being mapped to that public IP address. And then we have the private subnet, which is another subnet that is going to contain our resources. Okay. So now let me show you how you can access the FortiGate file after you've deployed it and you've noticed the public IP address. And so let me do it from scratch. So coming here. So I'm going to copy the public IP address. And then you're going to access it over HTTPS. By default, it's allowed to access over HTTPS on port 443. So as you can see, I'm going to just put the public IP address here so that your URL looks like this. Okay. So instead of if you have a FQDN, which is a domain, you can tie it to the public IP address and then use that, which is actually much more secure. But this is how you access it via HTTPS. So once you do that, it's going to show you the the login page of the FortiGate file. Now remember, when you were creating it, you set the admin, you set the username and the password that you then allows you to log into it. So I'm just going to log into this admin FTT. Once you put your password, it's going to log into the FortiGate file. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So what I would do is that I'm going to share that public IP address with all of you and the credentials to log into it right now. So all of you can try to log into it and enter the password and the username, and you sort of like see by clicking. Obviously, you're not going to click something that can change anything, but you sort of like see how the whole graphical user interface looks like, and I can then walk you through what it is that needs to be changed and how this whole thing works. But this is basically how you access the FortiGate firewall. So you put in the public IP address, and once you put in the public IP address, let me go and share it. So I'm just going to put it in the chat. Okay, so that's the public IP address. So I'm going to create an account here that will allow you to see everything. Obviously, you're not going to be changing. So if you want to change the password of this thing or the admin account, you just go to where it says system, and it will show you administrators. Now, let me tell you, this is a very easy firewall to work with, and it works very efficiently in most cases, which is why it, it's enterprise grade right now, and a lot of companies are moving their networks from the other firewalls to this one because of its, the way it works, the way you can work with it. It's easy to work with, and it sort of like gives you a pictorial view of your network. You get to understand, a lot of things in your network. It gives you like a lot of visibility and these, dashboards that you can use to access things. So you go to systems, you go to administrator. That's where you can create an administrator here. So we're just going to create an administrator here. We're just going to call it student. And then we are going to give it a password. Now, you don't use these simple passwords in the production area. You never do this. You want to use a very secure password, which is a password that is 8 characters long and above, and it does contain a symbol, a small letter. I'm sure you've seen this in the course that you were doing when they were explaining about passwords. You need to do that because there's something called brute force attack, which is, I don't know if everyone knows what brute force attack is, but which is someone can run a brute force on this FortiGate firewall where it is like iterating, iterating a lot, just trying out like a lot of different passwords, different combinations. And because the system is so powerful, it can generate like thousands of these passwords in a minute. So if you use a simple password, it's just going to be guessed, and that's how people get hacked. So you want to use a strong password with all the characters, and all the recommended characters, so that you can safeguard yourself from this brute force attack. So I'm just using admin123 here, so we can make it easy. And then administrator profile. So you can also change, force the admin to do that. You can use two-factor authentication. In most cases, you want to use two-factor authentication, which is your phone or your SIM card or something like that. And you can also restrict login to trusted hosts, which means you can put your own public IP address here so that only you can access. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but for now, I'm just going to create this admin profile student, and that is the password, and save that. And so this is my last pass. All right, admin profiles is where you can, see what sort of like rights you want to give them if you're creating a password. So if you come in here, you can see that the prof admin has all of these rights. So if I want to give read rights, I can change it from here. And then I can, sort of like also give them the commands they can do. Can I command them, allow them to do these commands? You can also do it from here. And once you do that, you then click on OK. So if all of you can try to access the FortiGate firewall using that public IP address, you just go to your browser and you use that public IP address, and then you put in that is your password, and your username here would be student. So your username is student and admin123 is your password. Let me know if you guys are able to access it. All right, so you're just going to do later. Can you click on later? You just click on later, and then, yeah, you can click on later. Okay, if anyone is having challenges, you just let me know. All right, I hope that everyone is, trying to access the firewall, because that's where it starts, right? That's where, because if you sort of like have an experience where you actually see the thing and you try it, because in most cases it's very difficult for you to know that you don't actually know something to sort of like try, because then you can have these little issues. Because the thing about, studying any application, anything, any tool that you're going to use is about trying it. Because when you try it, you get to discover things, you get to learn, because you're going to face some challenges. And if you override these challenges by thinking, then the next time, you're not getting, those skills. So you need to sort of like try it and fail at it, and sort of give yourself some feel of what it is. So this is a file that gets put into a network. So this is what it looks like. So this is like the same concept that works here works on the rest of the other file. So tell me if you've managed to log into the file, because the next thing is that you should be able to deploy a file into the Azure environment, just like what I did. Like you said, it literally takes you 20 minutes to actually sort of like deploy. And that's one of the top skills, right? Like if you can, I'll tell you right now, like a network security in the cloud is one of the things that are actually like big in the industry, because a lot of organizations have moved their things from on-premises into the cloud, right? Their applications have moved into the cloud. Most of the things have moved into the cloud. But in the cloud, there's also networks, and who is securing those networks? So that's where you come in, right? So you could have an environment with, a lot of databases, secret databases that are in there. Probably, the invoice for that environment is actually maybe $20,000 a month. You're working for that company, and you need to protect all of those resources. And it becomes very, very important for you to really know how to use a firewall and really know how to test things out, how to make sure that, there's nothing that's going to come inside. Everything has been done correctly. So it's really a top skill that you can have, and you get paid to do exactly this. You deploy, your FortiGate firewall, and then you configure it so that the network is secure. And then in cybersecurity, you then configure Splunk logs and this FortiGate firewall, because it is the one. Okay, all right, no problem, no problem, no problem. It's not a problem. Okay, we're gonna have a lot of opportunities where you can also try to access this. But yeah, that's, I'm saying that's where it starts, because then it goes to, because the FortiGate file, the reason why it's important to learn a file is that you're going to be working with the logs a lot, and the logs that you're going to be working with in a SOC environment, let's say you then decide to go a SOC analyst, are going to be coming from network files. So this file could be then feeding a Splunk server with, with the logs that it gets from the traffic. So the Splunk server then aggregates these logs, and then it makes them make sense to you. So you might have a lot of these FortiGate firewalls across different branches, and they're feeding into that Splunk server. So no problem. I hope everybody has managed to at least access it. So if you can follow me, right? if you are on the dashboard, if you scroll down, in fact, if you close the dashboard, drop down, and you see this network tab here. If you click on network, you see where it says interfaces. If you click on interfaces, this is one of the most important part of the file. Why? Because this is where networking happens. This is where we decide which networks are going to be given, and which is going to be our subnet, or what are the IP addresses that we're going to use. So that's where everything like that happens, because this is where the interfaces are. Now, what are interfaces? Interfaces are the ports. So you see this FortiGate VM looks like this. If it was a physical device, it would be looking like this. And these are the ports that are on the device. So we only have port number 1 and port number 2 for this specific FortiGate. But you can go ahead and create as more ports as you want. And these ports, port 1 and port 2, are the interfaces that you get to networking settings here in Azure. And you have this one, which is the networking interface. And right here, it's shown as port 1, and it does have this IP address. And again, like I said, you don't see the public IP address that we are connecting with here, but it is on this interface. So this is a security feature. So you're not going to see it, because the reason why I say this is because sometimes you're going to work with these things in an on-premise network, and you're going to have a public IP address here, not a private IP address for your public subnet. So in the cloud, they hide it because they want you to use the private IP address. Okay, so that's number one. So this is where you can set up your network. So if I double click into port 1, which is the interface, the port that I'm going to give it a name, I can say this is my public network. Oh, it's from my ISP, so I can say ISP 1. So this is where I'm getting my ISP. This is where I put the public IP address. Because it's in Azure, this is being done automatically because the network is already in Azure. So we use DHCP here to get an IP address. And again, like I said, this is where the public IP address is. It's just that you don't see it. So you have addressing mode. You can use manual, which is where you set the IPs yourself, or you can do DHCP, which is Azure gives you the IP address, right? Which is what we're going to use. And then we have a default gateway, which we are going to get from Azure. This is where this option here is selected. If it's not selected, we're not going to get the default gateway. And if we don't get a default gateway, we are not going to be able to access this FortiGate file. So that's why it is here, right? And here, another important part, right? So for your interfaces, you may not need to know the rest of the other stuff, but for your interfaces, you need to understand, as I was saying, that people hack you from outside into your network, right? So you have to disable things that allow people from the outside to access your network. So one of the things are the protocols, right? Your public IP address here can be accessed through different protocols. And the protocols are what we were speaking about on the OSI model, that you have different protocols for communication, and we already know them. And we have HTTPS, which we are using HTTP, SSH. So here, if someone was safeguarding, you want to make sure that you don't have any of this. They are disabled. Okay, maybe you can leave ping because you might need it for troubleshooting purposes to kind of ping the IP address here. But you want to disable all of this so that no one can be able to access your file, right? And then you can use a VPN to access the file. Okay, but in this case, we're just going to let it like that. I'm just going to disable SSH because we asked you. I'm going to disable HTTP, and I'm just going to disable SSH. And so these protocols are very important. You need to disable them so that the people outside can't have access to your file. So HTTPS is on because that is what we are using to access the file. Right. I know somebody said that I couldn't access because of a security issue. Now, the reason why you were not able to access it is because of what is known as a certificate issue. So I'm sure you know that for a website to be secure on the internet, to be accessed via HTTPS, it does need to have a certificate. A certificate is then what tells us that this site is secure. So you've seen a lot of, if you can see on top here, it says not secure. The reason is because the GUI that we are accessing, or this web page, does not have an SSL certificate that is recognized. So SSL certificates is another topic that we'll go through, but it is very important that if you are safeguarding web applications or whatever it is that way as web pages, you do use HTTPS traffic because it is much more secure, not HTTP traffic. In this case, we are using HTTP traffic and we are having the error because we don't have a certificate. So you can go and fix this as well in the Azure environment. It's very simple to do. But that's the reason why you see that secure, not secure prompt. So you get to see it a lot because a lot of firewalls use these web pages and they don't have the actual certificate. So you can go and then set, if you do have a certificate, you can go and store your certificate. And if it's recognized worldwide, then when you try to access the FortiGate firewall, you're not going to have the error. So that's why it is there. And here, our port 2 is what we are going to use for the LAN network. Okay, this is what we're going to use for the LAN network. And what is the LAN network? The LAN network is where we're going to put in the resources that are going to be on private IP addresses. And if they are on private IP addresses, it simply means that they cannot be accessed from anyone who's outside that network. Okay, and the way we then access them is through using a VPN, which is a security thing that you can do. So here is we're going to use a LAN network, and we're not going to do any DHCP, because you can also use the FortiGate for DHCP, which is allocating IP addresses, but we're not going to use that. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create our LAN networks. So I already know that. So if you want to see your networks in the Azure portal, you just type in virtual network and then they appear here. Virtual networks, it shows you your virtual networks. What are the virtual networks that I have? Right, the one we are focusing on right now is the Linux test VNet. That's the one that we're working with. So if you click on LAN test VNet and you go to settings, you will see the subnets, right? And these are the subnets that are on this Linux test VNet that we are using for the FortiGate firewall. Right, so we have the default, which is 1.0.0, and we have the default 2, which is the 1.0, so this is going to be our LAN, and this is going to be our public IP address. Okay, it may not make sense right now, but don't worry about it. As you go to try this out, it will get easier and easier. So if I go back to my file, I can, because I know the network, I can allocate any IP in that network to my firewall. Again, you don't enable these things in a production environment unless you are doing some, if you are setting up, obviously you want to allow HTTPS because you want to connect through that. But once you're done setting up your things, you want to disable that. You're going to make sure that that is disabled. Okay, ping is what allows you to ping the IP addresses that you've just set up here. So if ping is not allowed, you cannot be able to ping it. I hope everyone understands what ping is. Okay. So after that, we're just going to click on OK. And we have a LAN interface, and we're just going to call this WAN interface. Okay, so now it says LAN and now it says WAN. So this is our public This is our public subnet. This is our private subnet. So the private subnet, we don't have a DHCP server here because it's already there in Azure. Okay. So that is under the network tab. Now, if you go here, this is where you set up your DNSs, right? So FortiGate is their own DNSs that they call FortiCloud servers. You can use this by default. As you can see right now, it's actually working, but you can also set up your own DNSs. So let's say maybe you want to use the Google DNSs. And I know that the Google DNSs is either 8.8.8 or it's either 1.1.1.1 or it's either 4.4.4.4. So you can also use these DNSs. But what's recommended is to use the FortiGuard servers, right? So here is where you get to set the certificate. So the certificate that's giving the error when we try to access it, it is set up here. So this Fortinet Factory certificate is not a is not a certificate that's recognized worldwide. What if you want to use it? You have to install it on your computer that you are going to use to access the firewall. So here you can buy your own SSL certificate, and then you can use that SSL certificate, and then that error will go away. Okay, but this is what you get to set under DNS. So these are the areas that I'm indicating right now are the areas that are important that, if you're working with these things, you're supposed to know, right? So DNS, you need to understand DNS, and SD1 is another concept, but we don't have to worry about it right now. And we're gonna go into something called static routes. Now, static routes, the route table, routing, this is where it happens. So like I said, you need to, if it's a router, it tells you the next hop. In other words, it tells you the next router, right? When you try to go on internet, your router's job is to tell you, you know what, the other router is over there, go this direction. If it's down, go this direction. So the static route is the route that you put in on the FortiGate file that will tell it where to go if someone tries to access something, right? Who is connected to that network. So one of the, the most static route that you're going to use is the route that goes to internet. Now that route uses the destination for this is going to be 0.0.0. Now IP addressing, if you do go deep into IP addressing subnetting, you find that there are some IP address ranges that are reserved for Google, that are reserved for stuff like this. Like for example, this 0.0.0.0 it only represents the internet, so that's why we use it as the destination. But you can also use another public IP address. Let's say if it's a camera thing, right? And now you need your gateway address. So a gateway address is the next router. So if I say WAN here, and because my WAN is coming from Azure, say dynamic, it's going to give me automatically. It's going to give me my my gateway address, right? But in most cases, you won't be having it with DHCP. You actually be having a public IP address that you get from your ISP, and that's what you put in here. So this is already configured automatically. So here is just sort of like a repetition, because that's why we can actually access the FortiGate. As I showed you, if you go back to interfaces and you go to the WAN, you will see that we are using DHCP, and we already have this DNS and the default gateway. So the static route is already there. That's why you don't see it here. But if you want to put your static routes, this is what you do. You come in here. So that is the number 3 thing that to know in a firewall. Any firewall, interfaces, DNS, static routes. Very important things. Then you have what are known as policies. So I'm just going to go up here, and I'm going to do network, and then there's policies. Now here is where you set the policies and rules that defines what you want to achieve, right? So if I go to firewall policy, you'll see that there's already a firewall policy that was configured. Let's see. Okay, so if you open this page, to make it easier, to view it easier, I always use the by sequence one. So if I click on by sequence, it's going to show me, this policy here. implicit deny. That's the only policy that is there when you first deploy the FortiGate. So you need to put in a policy that's going to allow traffic. So how do we do that? We create new. Now you might not see it on your, if you're opening this with me, you might not see it because it's you only have read writes. But this is how you do it. You create a new policy, you give it a name. So I can say internet policy. And then you're going to choose the incoming interface, which is the internet interface. And you're going to choose the LAN as your outgoing interface. And source is who is going to be connecting. So we're going to use O, the source. So these are the addresses that are going to be connecting. So O just means everything. If you have users and groups, you can do that here. And what's going to be your destination? And we're gonna put all because we just wanted to allow all the traffic. But that's where you define your destinations. If you have only one public IP address that you want to access, that is where you put it. Same goes for service. You can also say, I just want to allow SMB traffic for this policy, right? I just want to allow any other, maybe you want to allow HTTPS only, maybe you just want to allow RLDP, maybe you want to just allow UDP, or you just want to allow people to connect to a server under RDP, so you just put in the RDP service. But in most cases, if it's an internet policy, you just want to use all because it's covering all the protocols. Sorry, that happened. And then we put in the source is all. And then we put in the destination. And then we'll put in the service. So for every file that you're going to work with, that's how you get to put in, that's how you get to create a policy. And again, what I was talking about, network address translation. So if we're coming from the LAN and going to the NAT, we need that to happen. So that's why we'll enable NAT, but it's already enabled by default. But that's just kind of like what it means. Now, where it gets interesting about the file, which is very important, again, this is gonna sound gibberish right now, but this area here, which says security profiles, is what makes this WAR file important, right? Because what you are going to do is you're gonna say, I want the antivirus. So everybody that's going to be accessing the internet or anything is gonna have this antivirus solution pass through it, right? You can choose to edit it or to create your own antivirus, but this is just an antivirus that sort of like scans the traffic as people get to use it, right? So you can even go, if you want to go advanced with it, you can actually say inspected protocols. I want to inspect the HTTP protocol. I want to scan SMTP, which is to do with emails and stuff like that. But for antivirus, normally you just want to do default. Web filter is what it deals with. It deals with web categories and websites, what gets visited and what doesn't. So let's say I say create new web filter. Okay, so here, as you can see here, we have something called the FortiGuard category-based filter. It's giving us the categories of all the websites. So we decide whether to block or to allow it from here. So you have drug abuse. These are just all the categories that are there. Discrimination, whatever. So it's categories. So you have the potentially liable category, which lists all of these things. And by default, you can see what's happening. And you also have the adult mature content. If in most organizations, people just use this to close out, or this adult content and everything in schools. This is why also FortiGate is becoming a big thing in schools and colleges, is because it allows you to do this very effectively. So you can, you can sort of like create a network where students are just visiting the network and they only go to the things that are allowed. They don't access the other things that you don't want them to access. So that way that comes in. So you can also tell your users, I don't want them to be downloading, those BitTorrent downloads, right? Somebody is in a corporate network, and if they go to BitTorrent, again, they are more susceptible to be blocked. So you block that from the web filter, right? Because you all have all these categories. Now these are the other categories. Right now, if I go to my networking and try to click on a phishing link, it's just going to allow me, right? Unless if maybe my browser detects it. But beyond that, it's just going to allow me. Now the firewall is just going to make sure whatever you try to access, which is malicious, is already blocked. You can't even access that. I think a good example is Nafi will say that I couldn't access it because it's a bank internal network. The bank internal network is blocking all these things using a firewall. So they have a firewall which looks like this, and this is where you get to change the policies and allow those things. We can see it. It has a lot of other categories you can exploit. You just sort of see what type of traffic you can block and allow. So if you want to block something, you just highlight on it and then you click on block, and all of a sudden it's blocked. If you want to warn, so warning is that it gives you a warning. It gives the user a warning to say, yo, the site that you're going to access is malicious. But if you accept the risk, you can continue. If you want to block, they just say no access. You can't. So if you want to monitor, we can see it in the logs that somebody was clicking on a malicious site. That's what monitor is for. Allow just allows the traffic to pass through. So those are the categories that you use to block and allow things. Now, because these are categories, we are going to have URLs that might be considered malicious. For example, your site or a site for a website that doesn't have an SSL certificate. So it's going to be considered what? Malicious. But no, it's not malicious. We actually use it for our business. So what do? Then you do a URL filter where you can then create a URL and maybe say facebook.com. No, Facebook is too much. Let's say just return. So there's a site called returnafrica.com, and this is how you then make sure that even if the category is blocked up there, this site is always going to be accessible to users. Okay, so that's what the URL filter is for. All right, so that's the web filter. You also have the DNS filter that can allow you to, again, you can sort of like block certain DNSs and allow certain DNSs. You can also do that. It also gives you these categories for DNS. You can allow and block things in here, similar like what we were doing before. So it's things that you then go ahead and learn more. So there's also the application control, which is big. This allows you to block application and allow certain applications. In other organizations, besides them just blocking malware, they can actually say, yo, we don't want our users to use social media during this time, right? So this is where you get to do it. You get to come here, you get to define the applications you don't want to be accessed by users. If it's a school or if it's a college, if it's a university, this is where you do it. You come here, you say, okay, social media, we're going to block between these hours and we're going to allow between these hours. This is where you do it. So this is security profile for applications. All the applications that are there in the world are here. So you can literally find any application that you want to block or allow. And you can just type it here, let's say TikTok. And it will appear here. Let's see, TikTok, come on. But the other thing is, if you cannot see an application, there's also like a documentation where you can go and look further to say, why is this application not appearing here? It might be just named in another name that is not TikTok or something like that. So there's a place where you can go and sort of like Google that, sort of like see what that application is written like in the FortiGate file. So if you don't find an application, there's always a documentation you can go to and like get a reference of why the application is not there or how it's written. So any application you need to deal with would be able to be shown here. Now it says connection lost. Okay, so there's also the timeout. So if you log in for like some time, it'll log you out automatically. But yeah, if you see the firewall policy area, that's where you get the policies that allows you to create these things. Web filter, application control. So let's quickly make a policy here. I'm just gonna quickly make one and save it. Again, you don't use the default ones. You want to create your own filters for this. This is the IPS engine that I was talking about, which is one of the biggest things that comes with the FortiGate. It's an engine that always scanning for new malware and everything, and it can detect that, and it can put it into your logs, and you can also see that. So once you're done, there's also SSL inspection, which is like certificate inspection, like we were talking about, like when you try to visit a site without a certificate, it's going to get blocked. This is what does that. This is another important part of things, log allowed traffic. So you want to do all sessions. If you're monitoring your network, you want to do all sessions. That way, you get to see everything that happens through the network that goes through this firewall policy. And then after you do, you just click on OK. And then you have your policy here, right? And everyone that's going to be coming from the LAN, which is the LAN network, to the WAN network is going to be using this firewall policy. So you can generate as many policies as you want for different things. You can say, I want to generate a policy for the marketing department. I want to do that for the accounts department. I want to do that for the marketing department, because their needs may vary. Things they need to access may vary, so you might have different policies for those. But firewall policy, that's where you get it in a FortiGate firewall. There's a lot of other things that you see listed here, but I'm just going to indicate and show you the most important parts. Addresses is where you get to define IP addresses or MAC addresses. For example, if you are creating a network with 15 people and you want to make sure that their devices only are the ones that get to connect to that network, you can use something called MAC filtering. I'm sure we've all seen it somewhere. And that's what you can do with addresses here. So there's a lot of things that happen to the FortiGate firewall, but the important areas that you need to know is the network area, the firewall policies, the addresses, and you need to know the VPN portal here. This is where you get to configure the VPN that can then allow you to connect to this FortiGate firewall. So we have the SSL VPN, we have something called the IPsec VPN. SSL VPN allows you to create these VPNs that people can use to connect as clients on their networks, right? So the FortiGate uses something called FortiClient VPN, which then allows you to connect to this, and you'll be able to access the resources. So one of the things that I wanted to do with you guys was to create this network and deploy this FortiGate firewall, and then deploy a FortiClient VPN on the firewall that will allow all of us to download these things and try them out on our computers. Okay, so because of the time, I don't think I'll be able to do that, but it's just a topic that you can go and do a little bit more research on. The next time we come in, when we have like all the environment set up, we are going to go through that process of the VPN, where you use the VPN to connect to this environment. And once you connect to this environment, you can then connect to a Windows server that we deploy here. privately. So that's because that's something that you need to know at first before you even begin to do anything in the cloud. How can you access the cloud environment with a VPN? Because that is the only way that is secure, and in most cases cheaper to use to access things in the Azure portal. Okay, so there is a lot that we can talk about the FortiGate firewall. But you're not going to understand it on the first day or the first day you see it. Okay, but this is just to sort of like give you an understanding of what a firewall would be like and what will we be doing when we have a firewall in the network, right? So basic stuff. Now, the most important stuff that you have to know if you are in the cybersecurity, in the network security, is the logs. Now, logs are very important, a very important part of the network security, because that's what we work with every day in the, in those SOC environments to see what's going on in the whole environment, right? The traffic passing through. So the FortiGate is the firewall. That's the device that's collecting the logs. And we have a Splunk server or a SIEM solution, as we spoke about the last lecture, that aggregates all that logs and then it makes make sense to you. Like for example, Splunk, which is something that we again going to deploy, and we're gonna see how a SIEM looks like once we have the SIEM, the FortiGate firewall. So this is the log. So when you go to the FortiGate firewall, this is where you see the logs. So you get to see different types of logs that passes through here. And okay, I think this VM that I created doesn't have a lot of memory. So if you have a virtual machine or if you have a FortiGate firewall that has a lot of memory, you can have local logs on it. But if you don't have something with a lot of space on it, you can forward those logs to another solution, like the SIEM solution, like what we're talking about right now. So this is a free trial. I'm sure that they won't show you all the logs here unless you link it to you can see system events, which is good because for system events we can see system events for a lot of other things. We can see VPN events, we can see SD-WAN events. So by VPN events, if somebody connects, I can be able to see it here that somebody is connected. And then we have security events, which is what happens through your, those policies we were talking about earlier, like where you can block and allow stuff, right? System events, you can come in here and you can see those logs, web filter, right? If somebody was clicking a link and whatever, you can see it here. The unit we use doesn't have enough memory. That's why you don't see nothing here. But you see the logs here. If somebody clicks a link or whatever, you see all the logs here. You can actually come here and search for those logs. And it's not only web filter, it's DNS query, file filter, application control, intrusion prevention, and the logs will be getting listed here. This is why this device becomes much more powerful now, because we have all these logs, and what we will eventually do is that we'll then link it to a SIEM solution that's going to show us all these logs, and we can do it from here. So once we have a SIEM server, we will be able to link this FortiGate file. We say syslog, and when we put it in this Splunk server IP address here, and all the logs that gets through here gets to that SIEM solution. That's normally how a SOC environment will be set up. So you have the branches that have the firewalls forwarding all those logs to your SIEM solution, and you work with the SIEM solution to see what's going on through the network. So a firewall is one piece of that is important that you can use. Obviously, you can also have Windows logs for your endpoints and stuff. But yeah, generally, the firewalls are what will be forwarding your traffic logs, your networking logs to the SIEM solution. Okay, so that is, you also have the system area here, which is something you need to know, because like I said, the first system administrators is where you get to set up admin user accounts. Depending on somebody's role, you can do admin profiles where you give them access to certain things, or you can create a new profile, and you give them reading rights. So it's an area that you'll be working with if you have people that are working with you. Maybe somebody just needs to see the policies. Maybe somebody just needs to see the dashboards. So you can do that over here. Okay, firmware registration is where you can upgrade to the firmware of this thing, which is something you're expected to do. Okay, so if there's an upgrade, you can click here and then you can do upgrade. and there's a process you have to go through to make sure that that gets upgraded, right? So what is full fabric upgrade? This means that if you have more other devices, which is not just one device, that are connected to the firewall. So we have, other firewalls that are at other branches and, access points and all that. If you have that security fabric, you can, sort of like upgrade it at once from this area here. And then you have the settings of the firewall, which is, like, again, a very important thing, because once you deploy it, this is where you get to set the name. You can say, okay, so you give it the name, and also you give it a time zone, which time zone, whichever time zone that you will be in. That's where you can change that. You can also change the HTTPS port, which is very important, because in most cases you don't want to use the default port that we are using here. You want to change the port and use something that is not known. That if somebody for some reason has the IP address, they cannot get to the HTTPS GUI. So that is the settings. And also the settings to do with timeouts, like how, and the password scope and stuff like that. So it's some of the things that you have to know, because for minimum length, you want to enforce people to use a secure password. So this is where you do it. It's all in settings. You can also change the color of these things if you want to do that. You can also do it here. But yeah, basically that's what a FortiGate, a basic FortiGate firewall would look like. A network firewall. You have your interfaces where the network is going through. Then for those interfaces to communicate with each other, you need a policy, and that policy will need security profiles to what? To secure the traffic. So that even in Checkpoint, even in Sourceforce, the same concept works. You have your interfaces, traffic pass through these interfaces, and you need a policy to make sure that it cleans out your traffic. And a policy consists of those security profiles, like web filter, application filter, that you can use to allow and block things as a network security engineer. So that's what you'll be doing. So you get to make those decisions from the stuff you see from the logs, right? So your logs in a SIEM solution is going to give you ideas of what is being accessed, what is trying. So now you see, and then you plan out like your policies. You configure your policies in a way that is responding to how the SIEM solution is showing you where the vulnerabilities are, where the weak points are. So that's what basically a firewall is. It's gonna, like I said, it's going to look like it's a lot of things that you need to learn, and but it is very simple the more you start using it and doing it. So I know that there's somebody who say they have a free trial. So for those who have a free trial, you can go ahead and try to do this deployment that I did, right? So let me see if I can pull out the documentation for that. Okay, that's the documentation that will give you the guidance to deploy a FortiGate firewall in an Azure environment. It's a simple step-by-step that you can follow, and you end up having your FortiGate firewall. And after you have your FortiGate firewall, you can then access it via the public IP address. And that's one of the main skills that is that you should have in the network security industry at this moment. Like I said, most organizations are moving to the cloud, and they want somebody with network security in the cloud. And why? Because they have their workloads in there and they want them secure. So if there's no firewall in the cloud, then anybody can access those things. So they want somebody like you to come in and do this stuff, deploy the FortiGate firewall, configure our VPNs, make sure that everything is safe, and you use a SIEM solution to monitor the traffic in the cloud. You can use a Defender. Like I said, there's many tools we can look at that, but this is just to make sure that we sort of like have an understanding of what it is and how does it get set up. And if you can also go and try a lot of other things with it, just to see, and as you learn more about network security. So the other last thing I want to talk about is called NSGs. these network security groups. For every interface you have, interface, I mean, like if you create a Windows server, for example, it's going to have an adapter to connect to the network, right? So that adapter comes in with a network security group. A network security group is just like a small inbuilt file. Think of it as your Windows file, right? So in Azure, we have that, and we call those network security groups. And for each thing that you deploy, or for each subnet, you get to have this NSG, and then this is where you block and allow traffic in terms of ports. So as you can see from here, because this person wanted to connect using SSH to his to the Linux machine that they deployed, so they open up this port. Without this port open, you can access that thing. So that's why the NSG is there. It just adds another layer of security to make sure that you just allow only the things that you want to allow, and you have a secure environment. So that is that. So I know that I talked about a lot of things, and like I said, the multi-client VPN is something that we are going to do. It's something that we are going to do. Probably the next lesson when we meet. I want each one of you to download the multi-client VPN on their machine, and I want you to connect to that VPN to connect on your machine. And I would want you to see something that we call forced tunneling, which means that when you connect on a VPN, your public IP address changes, right? Remember, you have your public IP address from the ISP, that changes when you connect through a VPN that is using forced tunneling. Now, after that, you would be able to then save the internet securely, because all your traffic that you are now once you connect to the VPN, all your internet traffic, that means if you go on social media, if you access anything, it's going to be inspected by that firewall, because it's going through that firewall as long as you're on the VPN. So because of that, you are now able to connect to whatever we are going to deploy in the environment. So for example, we're going to deploy a Windows server, right? And the Windows server doesn't have a public IP address, it doesn't have a private. So you need a VPN to do that. So that's one of the things that we're going to do as an activity. And from there, you would then be able to you then be able to understand how a VPN will work like. And if you're going to deploy that as a solution for people using a FortiGate file, how do you do it? Like I said, there are so many ways you can do it. There are so many things to use, but the important stuff is that you sort of like understand the functionality of each, so that when you go into an organization, you understand that there's a private network that I need to protect, and if people want to connect it remotely, I gotta get a VPN solution that allows me to do that. So that is the secure way of doing it. So just means that, okay, if you actually need a VPN to connect to it, it means your private network is secure. It means you're blocking the rest of the other stuff. You don't have HTTPS allowed to go into your public IP address and stuff like that. It's just going to be secure that way. So that's one of the expectations that they expect you to have in network security. They want you to have those skills of deploying, working with firewalls, analyzing traffic. So from there, you can then use RDP or SSH to access anything that is in an Azure environment using its private IP address. So VPNs using encryption, which ensures confidentiality, which means no one can open that information before it gets delivered. Okay, if it actually gets opened, it won't be able to get delivered because it will be corrupted at that point. So and so designing a secure network. If you're designing a secure network, what are the things you be doing? So like I said, in network segmentation, you need the principle of least privilege access, which means when you're creating users, give them the least amount of rights they need to do their job. So that's one of the big things that is expected of you when you are on a job. You want to make sure that if you are the admin, for example, and you have people behind you, that you need to give access for something else. Don't give them the global admin if they just want to reset a password, right? So that's that's the principle of least privilege, which is something that you also have to know. And then there's the multi-factor authentication, right, which is the big thing right now, because multi-factor authentication is that from your Google Coursera course. I know that there's a topic that they discussed this, that is something that you have, right? Like if you have a smart card or your phone or something like that, that that authorizes you or that authenticates you to be the actual person that should be logging in. So that's MFA. You can also enforce that. And then again, the other thing that you'll be doing is regular updates and patching. So these firewalls, like I say, they get a firmware updates just like your Windows machine. And these updates, when they come in most cases, they'll be updates about a vulnerability that was discovered last month and somebody breached in. So Fortinet addresses that by giving you an update, just like the way it works in Windows. And then you upgrade that thing, and then that weakness is no longer there, right? So that's the best practices you have to know. There's also Wireshark. This is like a traditional tool, but it is also powerful when you are assessing a network. Let's say you are working in even penetration testing, right? And you're trying to bombard a network. Those are some of the tools that you use. We'll look at those things again, like in the next lecture when we have like an environment that is developed for us, and we'll see how we use Wireshark to sort of like inspect data flow and stuff. Now, I think my time is gone beyond. But if there's anyone like so far that has questions or anything that they might want to ask or concerning what we were talking about today, they can go ahead and sort of like give us yeah, so you can drop me your questions in the chat. Anyone else with questions, I'll be able to answer them. Okay, so what is the difference between the principle of need and the principle of least privilege? Okay, so the principle of need is when it's stated, it just means that the resources should be granted based on the specific needs of a user, so they can perform their job, right? So you like in the context of applications, for example, you just give them like the part that allows them to do their job. Like, what do you need to do your job? Like, what do you need to come from point A to point B, right? I need to have the power to reset passwords, right? That's what you need. And it's sort of like, I don't think there's like different. I think it's sort of like the same principle, because the principle of least privilege again is like what is it's also what you need, but what is the minimum level of access you need to be able to do your job, right? So it's all directing the fact that we need to give the rights, as minimum rights as possible to people, so they can just do their job, and not give them excessive rights that if they get compromised, then we have a bigger issue to defend against. So if someone is going to be just resetting passwords, you just want to give them the user administrator privilege wherever it is. So yeah, it's sort of like what you need to it's prioritization, what you need to do your job, and not more than that, right? I don't know if anyone has more questions, right? Like so I say, for those who did we have if Azure free trial, you can go ahead and try to do like deployment of the Azure FortiGate and read the documentation. The thing about these things is that, to be honest with you, it's more like 80% of the time it is your curiosity that makes you learn. Okay, so if you see a tool, right, or an application that you have to use, it's just similar to your phone, right? if you've never used the Apple phone before, if you're an Android person, for example, it's gonna feel like it's complicated to use an Apple phone, but after a couple times using it, you're gonna see that it's actually amazing. So that's kind of like everything with these tools and these applications and whatever that you'll be using. You wanna go ahead and try to do the stuff yourself. Give yourself some time to do some stuff, experiment. That allows you to learn, and that is if you actually do that in like I say, take screenshots and little videos or document your processes, then you can actually have a portfolio you can show someone, and someone would be able to hire you because they know what you're talking about. So it's different from when you say, I've had this course that I've taken. Okay, you did, but are you able to actually do this stuff? You know what I'm saying? Like, what technologies have you worked with? So actually going a step ahead, in your career, and actually going to try and do some stuff by yourself. And the biggest thing that I saw is that if you actually face challenges, right, doing stuff like when you're learning, if you face challenges, if you go ahead and resolve those challenges, in most cases, you learn that stuff quickly. So that's why it's necessary for you to sort of like, try things out. So if you can have a free trial, that will be very great for you. You find some time to just go ahead and test things out. And like, yeah, practice make perfect. The more you practice, the more you get to understand what you were reading. So that's what I would say. I don't know if there's anyone else who might want to add anything or something. All right. Okay. I think since we are all fine, so I think this is where the session for today will be ending. And again, I think Darlington will share with you some of the documentation we had on what we discussed today. But like, my biggest recommendation is that you go into these things and you go and look deep into it, and sort of like teach yourself some stuff, is that will be very important in your growth. And also the other important things that I think you can do that helped me, but just from my experience, that I think if you can do can be a bigger benefit to you, is you go, if you see, from, I think, I don't know if they were shared with you, but if you see from our last presentation, PowerPoint, there were links in there of people on Upwork that are in cybersecurity, right? So if you go to their profiles, you see what they do. Those are not the only people there. You can actually go and looking for more and more people. And when you look at their profiles, let that give you an idea of who you want to be. Like, if you look at their profile, it's sort of like, this is where I want to go. So you then identify the skills that you want to go and pursue, whether it's DevOps, whether it's ethical hacking. But you look at their profile and see what they've done, and that gives you a picture of the end result. I did this myself, and it really helped me because I now knew exactly where I was going, because there's a lot of information out there, and it gets populating your head, and sort of like so much stuff that you're learning, you don't know exactly what you're supposed to grasp, and you keep on jumping from one thing to another. So if you have somebody that have done exactly what you've done, you can look at their skills, and then you identify these skills, and you'll be like, okay, this is what I need to focus on to become this. So that was the point of those links on Upwork. And I think if we can use them, Upwork is another platform that is, that you can use to actually get jobs. So those people actually, you can see their earnings, and yeah, it's just a tip. You can go there and look at those people and have an idea of what you want to be, and you sort of like reverse engineer yourself to where they are now. So yeah, just go and look at those links, and that gives you a reference point, and I think that will be also beneficial in the way you structure what you want to then end up specializing in, right?
Okay. Okay, so thank you for your time and your knowledge.
Right.
We shall look into the content, because I believe I did share with everyone, so they should be able to check on the content that you're speaking about.
Let me see. Yeah, there's some presentations to do with FortiGate presentation. Maybe I didn't show it here, but I also shared that with say Darlington. So if you get it, you can you then just can share it. But yeah, I believe the rest of the stuff is shared with you.
Okay, not a problem. From what I'm seeing on the chat, I don't think there's any questions. So okay.
Thank you, Tim. Thank all of you. Yeah.
All right, thank you, sir. And then we shall see you on the next session.
All right, thank you, Tim. Have the rest
Have
of your
yourself
day.
a good day.
All right,
bye.
thanks. Cheers. Bye.
All right, guys. That was another session. Nothing to add. Let's just keep on pushing. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.